Thank you. So coming from the west coast of Canada, I haven't been sleeping, and I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning and decided I would change my whole presentation. So some of the design might be a little bit off, but one of the things I realized as I was going through my content and so on, I run a technology company. I used to run a mining company. I run a technology company now. So I think I have somewhat unique insight into it. The technology company I run is technology we actually built in-house at our mining company. But I realized that how technology builds trust with ESG and impact investors is almost, it's a little bit too focused in some ways. I'm going to talk a little bit about just how technology can build trust with stakeholders, and whether it's the overall theme is not so much with ESG or impact investors. I think if we build trust, and I'm a big believer, you build trust through transparency, add accountability. It's obviously going to impact your ESG investors, your impact investors, but it actually is it's going to create trust right across the entire mining investment ecosystem. So just a bit of background on mining and my view on mining. I actually don't think mining has ever been more relevant than it is today. And the reason for that is so I'm about 15 years in the sector. I became the CEO of a gold company, and a week later in 2012, the price of gold hit its all-time high, and we entered into a 7-year downturn. I've struggled, I think, even probably from a younger generation, just what is the relevancy of gold and mining and so on. But now we're in this point, and it's one of the first times that I've seen in my limited time in the sector where mining has never been more relevant. And whether it's because of the EV revolution, the renewable transition, mining finally has almost the political cover to actually be kind of the green. We all know, and we all hold up our phones and talk about there's so many metals in your phone, or we point to the, we love pointing to the car and how many metals go into that. But it's the first time in a long time that that association can be made. And especially on the battery metals, you actually have mining. We all know, because we're a bunch of people at a mining conference, that mining is required if we're ever going to be successful in transitioning to renewables or kind of building all the cars that we're all talking about that we're going to build. The other side is we're seeing more and more of it. Like, you've seen this precious metals environment, it's kind of competing with crypto, and we get super defensive. Like, you can't hold crypto in your hand. There's all these things you can't do with crypto. We know a lot of crypto investors. I tend to lose arguments when I talk about sort of the utility of gold versus a cryptocurrency. But also within that, what you're starting to see more than ever is this, we'll call it volatility, or in some cases a full-on fraud within the crypto world. What's between the inflationary environment and what's taking place in the cryptocurrency world, gold and silver have never been more relevant than they are today. So long story short, there's never been an opportunity like for mining. The question, and I'll talk a little bit technologies, what are we doing with this? What are we as an industry kind of doing with this opportunity that we have in front of us? So I run a tech company with about 45 people, and about 35 of those people don't have experience in the mining sector. So I spoke last week at the Ontario Mining Association, and it was about how do we attract the next generation? Like, how do we attract them to mining from kind of in school all the way through to kind of the jobs that we have now and so on. And it's been a highly competitive labor market. So how do we attract them? So I asked everybody from our team to give me sort of what is the good and what is the bad? And this isn't their feedback altogether. This is just the bad, sort of the negative feedback. But what's your impression of the mining sector? Mount Poly was the one came up a couple times. It's just, you say mining, people say Mount Poly. The big Rio tailings one as well. Environmental destruction, high risk, and social sacrifices. And this is something that I hadn't really thought about before, but actually just it's the social sacrifice. If you're kind of living in a place that's most Canadian universities or so on, it's there's only certain places where you would say, I'm actually in mining. I can't wait to go and dig holes and so on, because of some people. Like, I moved recently from Vancouver to Victoria, and I actually bought my house from, I'd say, probably the one other mining guy in Victoria. And the first thing he said is, don't tell your neighbors you're in the mining sector. Tell them you're in the tech sector. That's kind of the reality of it. And this is, we can get defensive about it, but that is sort of how a lot of society sees mining. But again, mining has never had an opportunity like it has today. People are just conditioned. Another one, conditioned to think that anything that causes visible damage to the environment is just bad in general. How can you dig a hole in the earth, what used to be a forest, and call that good? Doesn't make any sense. And you need to draw that association back to the car or the cars that no longer produce CO2 and so on. Anyway, the other one that really jumps out, old white man's game of mining appears in total contrast to making the world a better place. And kind of I'm sure you could see if I brought any of those people to this conference, it'd be pretty hard to argue with them about sort of the demographic of the mining sector. Long story short, I'm not saying this because there's anything wrong with the mining sector. I myself used to run a company that was since been acquired and is now kind of, we had one employee when I started, and now there's 500 people that work at that site. I've seen the benefits of mining. It's incredible, especially if you're from a place that's resource rich like Canada. But what's the problem? What is the problem with the mining sector? And I don't mean like what's wrong with mining. What is wrong in our ability to communicate what we do? And what is the role that technology might play? So one of the things that we do at Vrify when we hire new people, we'll often get them to go to 5 company websites. And a lot of these people do not have mining experience. Go to 5 company websites, download their PowerPoint, have a look through their website, and then report back to it and tell us what you think. And you can imagine the type of response we get. I don't get it. I have no idea what these companies do. And it's really interesting because we've sort of, the world has progressed. How people digest information has changed drastically. All of our attention span has now gone from, I don't know what it was 30 years ago, an hour, 30 minutes. Now it's 3.5 seconds. But we're still using the same tools to communicate. And one of the questions in the theme of this discussion is, how does technology build trust? You can't really build trust unless, first off, you're transparent, but unless there's a certain level of comprehension or understanding of what you're actually talking about. And that's where I think the mining sector does an absolute horrendous job. And I don't mean it to leg on it. It's just we're using the same tools we've always used and not acknowledging the fact that the way people digest information is very different. And it's not actually, in this image here, it's not PowerPoint, it's not the problem. If you actually take a PowerPoint company from any startup technology company, within 3 slides, you're actually going to have a bit of an understanding of what their value prop is and the problem they're solving. What we do is we just tend to kind of make information really technical. And what that ultimately does, and whether it's an investor presentation or a community presentation, any sort of stakeholder engagement, it sets a massive barrier up. And it's been really fascinating for me recently as I've been out meeting with tech investors, and I'll use their own product. I'll throw iPads on the table and walk them through. And 99% of these people I'm meeting with have no idea what mining is and so on. So it's really interesting to go through with someone who has no really incentive or knowledge. The first thing that resonates with people is, yes, I get it. Kind of, I drive a Tesla because all tech people drive Teslas. I understand that sort of there's not enough metal in the world to make enough of these, but that's where that sort of stops. So what I'll often do is I'll take them through this example. Like, here's your traditional mining pitch deck. And again, it doesn't have to be an investor deck. It can be the presentation that's used to communicate to a community group or something else. And one of the favorites of the mining sector, the cross-section. And I always describe this as every mining asset's a loaf of bread. Every mining company picks out the best, thickest, juiciest slice or slice of that loaf of bread, and then you go and raise a bunch of money on it. But let's take a look at the cross-section if you actually break it down and how to put this in context so somebody would actually understand it. So in this example, all this company is trying to show is that there's 2 dotted lines right here and right here. And in between those 2 dotted lines is a 200-meter wide zone. And at 200-meter wide zone, in this case it's called the boiling zone, that's where mineralization tends to occur. So as you're drilling out and poking holes, and I found all kinds of great ways to explain mining to non-mining people, as you're poking holes in your project and drilling it, you're trying to find, they call it this 200-meter wide zone, the boiling zone. And if we look at where this company has found all of its resources so far, you can see for the most part, it's found it within that 200-meter wide zone. This is where you usually zoom in to show, like, this is why mining is just like a video game, Minecraft. But what this company, all this company wants its investors to know is that the group that was here drilling this project for 30 years before it, when they were drilling these holes, they weren't drilling deep enough. They didn't have this model. They hadn't spent the time or the money. And this company's going to go and they're going to drill. All they're going to do is extend those holes and drill into this zone below. And the idea is not, I'm not trying to pitch you on a mining company right now. I'm trying to show you how you can take technical information in 30 seconds, actually put it in a format that somebody can look at and not only say, I get it, and they don't need to know what red and green and blue and all the colors within it mean. They can actually say, I understand it enough to have a conversation about what it means to your company. And in this case, we're going to extend a bunch of holes. And Another one I'll often use is kind of community discussions. And again, this all comes down to using technology to build trust. So community discussions. We have, at Vrify, we work with about 120 mining companies, right from early stage exploration right to advanced and even some reclamation projects. And some of the bigger companies that are in through the permitting, development, construction, and production stage, what they'll use it for is to communicate to community groups. And I've always liked this example because here we have two deposits, one here, 8 kilometers away. There's a second deposit that sits on the top of this mountain. And you can see, in this case, your red is your oxide, your green is your transitional, and blue is your sulfide. And again, breaking that down to some normal layman terms, red rock is really crumbly, doesn't take energy to break it up. Blue rock is like taking gold out of your kitchen countertop, takes a lot of money and energy to do it. But here, what we actually want to look at is sitting behind this mountain, and you can kind of see it here. There's a community in the background. And that community is going to be about 2 kilometers from this mine if it gets permitted and goes into production. And in this case, you could go through and you could put a photo and a PowerPoint of showing how great you are and jobs you're going to create. But what's most important for this community, and a lot of them have a long history in mining and so on, is they want to know whether or not, when they're looking at this mining operation, what they're going to see. And simply by creating a viewpoint using satellite imagery, you can show them, because the mine is going to be on the other side of the mountain, you'll never actually see it. And that's how you build trust with it. It's not to show up and kind of give a presentation about all the jobs you're going to create and so on. That stuff's really important. But it's also just be transparent and present information in a way that people can actually understand, so you can have a conversation about how it's going to impact them. The same project we'll look at is kind of, it's a PA stage or development stage project. So the facilities are going to sit here about 4 kilometers away from this deposit. And again, what's most important for this community or for this mining company to communicate is it's downhill. So when those trucks full of material, those big heavy trucks are driving down, they can actually generate electricity. And then when they're empty and lighter and coming back up, they can use that electricity to go back up. And it creates a very sustainable operation. So it's again, using kind of, it's my view on technology is just one of many tools that we can use. But what it ultimately comes down to is I think we overemphasize the need for transparency in the sector. Transparency is nothing without a proper comprehension or understanding. And we need to use tools today that facilitate understanding. And if somebody, because you might be meeting with a sophisticated mining investor, or someone who is kind of never spent any time in the sector at all. And we need to kind of use tools and give information in a way that people can actually digest it. Now, the last example, one of the last examples I'll give here is a press release. So press release is an interesting one because if you look at how a press release has evolved, and they used to be 1 or 2 or 3 pages. Now they're kind of 10 to 30 pages sometimes. And this is the industry's attempt to become more transparent. We have to put the entire drill table in. We have to have, obviously, a nice long quote talking about how incredible those results are. Then you have to have a disclaimer and so on. And you end up with again, a 10 to 15 page document all the time. It's evolved a lot because of things in the industry have taken place in the past, like BRIEX. And on the back of BRIEX, you end up with 43101 regulations. So we're now in an environment where we tend to over-disclose. And the idea is we're being more transparent, but it's actually the opposite. Because we're putting so much information out, and you take into account the attention span of people today, no one is going through your 7 pages of drill tables and understanding that on the 3rd page and the 7th line down, that there's a high-grade portion and how that interacts. It's just not how anyone works. So our take on drill hole data specifically is like, typically you take a press release like the one I just showed you. You've got a cross section, you got a plan map and lots of information. This is probably how much information people are digesting. Somewhere underground, there's 200 meters of some gold, and that's it. What they're not digesting is kind of what is the grade distribution within that? Where is that drill hole, say, in relation to the known resources? One of the most important ones is, well, first off, what is the geological state? And again, this goes back to the education component. Are you drilling in the hard rock, or did you discover something in the crumbly rock? Crumbly rock is good. less energy, cheaper to mine. But one of the most important ones is, where are you drilling in relation to all the drilling that's ever taken place in this project before? Technology exists today. Happen to run a company that actually does this. Technology exists today that you can do this. You can within 24 hours, you can take a drill hole table and put it in 3D and include that in a press release. It is actually, it's crazy that people make investment decisions without seeing this. And it's not because everyone's trying to hide information. It's because it's just the standard, again, is just essentially a cross-section or a PowerPoint, the way information is. I strongly believe, like, over time, as we're able to show, like in this example, where that drilling is in relation to historical drill database, it's going to get to a point where it's irresponsible to invest someone else's money without knowing if an area has ever been drilled before. In this case, it turns out there's actually some really exciting results. It just happens to not be the biggest number. But there's a hole here that's sitting 500 meters away. And if we look at that actual drill hole, there's 3 drill holes sitting above that they're going to go and test. So it turns out it's actually super exciting. It's just not the drill. Everyone naturally you'll always put the highest grade result within a press release. Turns out it's a smaller one that's a step out that's really exciting for investors. And all of this information. Now, one thing I've learned about mining and mining information data hasn't really changed that much in the last 20 years. Like, a block model today is not bigger and heavier than a block model 10 or 15 years ago. What's changed in the world is now we can take that block model, and at Vrify, we'll take files that are kind of 2, 3, 4 gigabytes, and we'll get them down to 12 megabytes so they load in a web browser in about 3 seconds. We now have the ability to share all this information. We just need to rethink and reframe what we do with it. So looking at, again, the topic of this presentation is using technology to build trust. And technology can be used to build trust, but it's not as simple as just saying, I use 3D. It's actually facilitating a level of understanding and comprehension, so people know what they're actually investing in. And when I say investing, maybe it's they're investing their money in it, maybe they're investing their time, maybe it's a community group, and they're kind of getting behind a project because they can see the positive benefits for it. The last one I'll do here is the last part of it, and I've always liked this example because it shows the educational component to it too. So this project that we're looking at, this is actually the project that we should see in a second. You might have to refresh your browser. Sorry, I decided to throw in a really heavy model. We'll see if this works. It's the beauty of using technology in presentations. It only works sometimes. This project is actually the project that I used to run in Quebec. And you had 2 really old, big mines. And sitting next to it, we made a discovery about 2 kilometers away. And what we realized is, and this is where we did our first virtual tour, this is the mine plan of that project close by. And zooming right into it, what we found in that all of the work that we tried to do, because we were trying to work with Indigenous groups, community groups, and regulators, and raise a whole bunch of money to advance our project and so on, what it came down to is actually just having a picture of our project. And this one photo from underground we used to show, this is a vein, and we're mining this vein, and anytime we see a white quartz vein where there's black stuff, that's where gold tends to occur. And even though it's a meter wide, which means that when we mine it, there's going to be a bunch of dilution on either side because you're going to mine something that's 2 to 4 meters, you could move a few meters away, and all of a sudden that same zone is 4 meters wide. And the promoter in me would say, well, you got to meter a drill core, but it's probably 4 to 6 meters over here. We didn't drill in the right area. But what we found in just this one photo, we were able to educate people on so many different elements of our project. But the other thing is everyone looks at it differently. Some people look at it for the geology. Other people are looking at the bolting, the rock bolting. Some other people just like trucks, and they want to see that. But again, technology allows us to do this. So finishing up here, when it comes down to it, is technology the answer? I do think it is. And I'm not saying that I think that projects like Vrify and these presentations may be part of that. But I think there are so many things out there that we can use as an industry to communicate what we do and show that value and really take advantage of the fact that there has never been a better time for mining. I know the market is horrible right now. Everyone's kind of depressed. This is what we do in mining. It goes up and it goes down. But there's actually never been a better time for the mining sector, because finally we're able to point to that Tesla driving by that everyone loves and talk about our role within that. I'll leave it at that. Thank you for the time.